A German shepherd collapsed at his door at -50 degrees. The dog's frozen paws were bleeding, and when the Delta Force operator looked closer, his heart stopped. A military collar, a fresh bullet wound, and eyes that held secrets. Someone had tried to execute this war dog and dump him in the Alaskan wasteland to freeze. The operator had one choice: let him in and become a target, or let him die. But that single decision would drag him into a conspiracy so deadly it would shake the military to its core. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from, and if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. The town of Coldfoot, Alaska, earned its name. Honestly, it was the kind of place where miners in the 1800s literally got cold feet and turned back a speck of civilization clinging to the edge of the Arctic Circle, where winter wasn't a season. It was a brutal 6-month siege against human survival. The thermometer had been stuck at -47 degrees Fahrenheit for 3 days now, and the weather service was predicting it would hit -50 by nightfall. At that temperature, exposed skin freezes in under 5 minutes. Your breath crystallizes before it leaves your mouth, and the air itself feels like broken glass in your lungs. This was the edge of the world, and Marcus Chen had chosen it precisely for that reason. Marcus Chen had been dead for 8 months. At least that's what the official military records said. In reality, he was very much alive, sitting in a cabin so remote that the nearest human being was 47 miles away, watching the Arctic darkness swallow another day at 3 in the afternoon. He'd chosen Coldfoot, Alaska for exactly one reason. It was the kind of place where questions died in the cold before anyone bothered to ask them. The cabin was a relic from the 1970s oil boom, built by a wildcatter who'd gone bust and abandoned it to the elements. Marcus had found it through a veterans network, the kind of information that passed through encrypted messages and handshake deals. He'd paid cash, no names, no paperwork, no trail. The structure was simple. One room with a wood stove, a narrow bed, a table, and a chair. The walls were thick timber, chinked with moss and tar to keep out the killing wind. A single window faced north toward the Brooks Range, where mountains rose like broken teeth against the perpetual twilight of winter. There was no electricity, no running water, no connection to the world he'd left behind. It was perfect. Marcus was 34 years old, but the face that stared back from the cracked mirror above his wash basin looked older, much older. His black hair had started showing silver at the temples. His dark eyes held a 1,000-yard stare that never quite went away even when he slept, which wasn't often. His body was still hard from years of Delta Force training lean muscle over a frame that had carried 80-pound packs through the Hindu Kush and repelled from helicopters into hot zones across 3 continents. But there was a new tension in his shoulders now, a weight that had nothing to do with physical loads. He'd been one of the best. That's what his commanders had told him. Sniper qualified, demolitions expert, fluent in Pashto and Arabic. 16 successful missions in denied areas. A silver star and 2 bronze stars in a classified file that most generals didn't have clearance to read. Marcus Chen was the kind of operator that got called when the mission was so sensitive that even the president needed deniability. Until Kabul. Until September 17th. Until the intelligence that was supposed to be solid turned out to be a trap. Until his 6-man team walked into a compound that should have held a high-value target, but instead held 30 Taliban fighters with heavy weapons and an exit strategy that had been compromised before they even hit the ground. Marcus had made it out. So had 2 others. 3 of his teammates hadn't. Their names were burned into his memory. Ryan Rodriguez, James Mack, Mackenzie, David Thorne. They'd been his brothers, and they'd died because someone somewhere had fed them poison disguised as intelligence. The after-action report had been classified. The funerals had been quiet. And when Marcus had started asking questions about how the intelligence had been so catastrophically wrong, he'd been told to stand down. When he'd pushed harder, he'd been offered a medical discharge for PTSD. When he'd threatened to go outside the chain of command, he'd been told in very clear terms that his career was over and that if he valued his freedom, he'd take the discharge and disappear. So he had. He'd taken the discharge, taken his savings, and disappeared into the one place on Earth where the long arm of the military-industrial complex couldn't quite reach. The end of the road in Alaska where winter lasted 8 months and darkness swallowed men whole. His days had fallen into a rhythm. Wake at dawn, which in December meant 10 a.m. Split wood, melt snow for water, eat, read, stare at the mountains. Try not to think about Rodriguez's kids who'd never see their father again. Try not to hear Max laugh in the wind. Try not to see Thorne's face in the moment the bullet hit him. Fail. Sleep. Repeat. It was a kind of dying. Slow and cold and lonely, but it was the only way Marcus knew how to keep living. The blizzard hit on December 19th at 4:47 p.m. Marcus had been expecting it. The weather service in Fairbanks had been tracking the system for 3 days, a massive Arctic front pushing down from the North Slope with sustained winds of 60 miles per hour and wind chills that would hit -80 degrees. This was the kind of storm that killed people, the kind that buried entire dog sled teams and wasn't found until spring thaw revealed their frozen corpses. Marcus had prepared. He'd stacked 3 cords of firewood against the cabin wall within arm's reach of the door. He'd filled every container he owned with melted snow water. He'd checked and rechecked his propane supply for the backup heater. He'd done everything right, because preparation was the one thing the Army had taught him that still made sense in civilian life. By 9 p.m., the world outside had ceased to exist. The wind screamed like a living thing, hurling ice crystals against the cabin walls with a sound like 1,000 tiny hammers. The temperature inside had dropped to 48 degrees, despite the wood stove glowing red hot. Marcus sat at his table wearing 3 layers and a wool hat, playing solitaire with a deck of cards so old the faces were nearly worn smooth. He didn't hear the scratching at first. The storm was too loud. But at 11:47 p.m., during a brief lull in the wind's fury, he heard it. A soft, desperate sound, scrape, 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 like something was trying to claw its way through the wooden door. Marcus froze. His hand moved instinctively to the Glock 19 he kept on the table. In 8 months of isolation, he'd never had a visitor. Not one. Bears were hibernating. Wolves didn't. Scratch at doors, they avoided human structures. Moose didn't have claws, which left only one possibility: human. But no human would be out in this storm, not unless they were running from something worse than the cold. He moved to the door silently. Years of training had made stealth a reflex. He pressed his ear against the wood. The scratching came again, weaker this time. Then a sound that made his blood freeze. A whimper, low and broken. The sound of something dying. Marcus made his decision in half a second. He threw the bolt, grabbed the door handle, and wrenched it open. The wind hit him like a fist, stealing his breath. Snow exploded into the cabin. And there on his threshold collapsed in a heap of frost, and blood was a German shepherd. The dog's eyes met his. Even through the ice crusting its face, even through the obvious agony of hypothermia, those eyes were alert, intelligent, pleading. This was no wild animal. This was a trained dog. And it was dying. Marcus didn't think. He holstered his weapon, bent down, and scooped the animal into his arms. The dog was heavy easily, 90 pounds, but it didn't struggle. It simply pressed against his chest as if it knew it had found salvation. Marcus kicked the door shut with his boot and carried the dog to the space in front of the wood stove. That's when he saw the blood. It was frozen in dark streaks along the dog's right flank. And when Marcus carefully laid the animal on his sleeping bag and began examining it with shaking hands, he found the wound. A bullet graze. Recent. Maybe 6 hours old. The round had carved a channel through the dog's side, just above the ribs, deep enough to expose muscle, but not deep enough to pierce the chest cavity. It should have been treated immediately. Instead, someone had left this dog to bleed and freeze. Marcus's jaw clenched. He'd seen a lot of cruelty in his years of service, but something about this felt personal, deliberate. He grabbed his medical kit, the same IFAK he'd carried in the field, and went to work. He cut away the frozen fur around the wound, cleaned it with antiseptic that made the dog whimper and tense, packed it with gauze, wrapped it tight. The dog never bit him, never snarled. It just watched him with those impossibly intelligent eyes. It was only after he'd finished treating the wound that Marcus noticed the collar. It was military grade. Black nylon with heavy-duty stitching and a metal buckle that had seen hard use. And stamped into a small metal plate riveted to the collar was text that made Marcus's heart stop. Axel K9 Unit 7th SFG 7th Special Forces Group, Fort Bragg, the same base where Marcus had been stationed before his deployment to Afghanistan. This wasn't just a military dog. This was a Special Forces combat tracker, one of the most highly trained animals in the entire U.S. arsenal, and someone had shot him and left him to die in the Alaskan wilderness. Marcus sat back on his heels, his mind racing. How does a 7th Group K9 end up 3,000 miles from Fort Bragg, bleeding in a blizzard? Military working dogs didn't just disappear. They were tracked more carefully than weapons. Every movement was logged. Every handler was accountable. If Axel was here, it meant something had gone catastrophically wrong. The dog was shivering violently now. Hypothermia. Marcus grabbed every blanket he owned and wrapped the animal in layers. He heated water on the stove and used a cloth to drip warm liquid into the dog's mouth. Axel lapped at it weakly. His eyes never left Marcus's face. "Who did this to you, boy?" Marcus whispered. "And why?" Axel couldn't answer. But as Marcus sat with him through that long frozen night, keeping the fire burning and the dog warm, a bond began to form. It was the first connection Marcus had felt to another living being in 8 months. The first time he'd had a mission beyond simply surviving another day. Keep Axel alive. Find out what happened. Make someone pay. The dog slept fitfully, his body twitching, as dreams or memories played behind his closed eyes. Marcus didn't sleep at all. He sat with his back against the wall, his Glock within reach, watching the door and listening to the storm slowly die. Dawn came grey and weak at 10:15 a.m. The blizzard had moved on, leaving behind a world buried under 4 feet of new snow. The temperature had dropped to -52 degrees. Marcus's thermometer outside the window couldn't measure any lower. This was the kind of cold that turned spit to ice before it hit the ground, the kind that killed in minutes. Axel was still alive. His breathing had stabilized. The shivering had stopped. When Marcus unwrapped him to check the wound, he found the bleeding had stopped completely. The dog was strong, a survivor. He licked Marcus's hand, and the simple gesture of trust hit Marcus harder than he expected. "You're going to make it," Marcus told him. "We both are." He prepared a meal of canned stew mixed with rice, the kind of calorie-dense food he'd lived on in the field. He gave half to Axel, who ate slowly but deliberately. As the dog ate, Marcus examined the collar more carefully. It was standard issue, nothing unusual except for one thing. The metal ID plate was slightly loose. When Marcus pressed on it, it shifted. His fingers found a tiny seam. The plate wasn't solid. It was hollow. Marcus grabbed a knife and carefully pried the plate open. Inside was a small, waterproof pouch. And inside the pouch was a micro SD card, no bigger than his thumbnail. It was marked with a single drop of dried blood. Marcus stared at it. This was why Axel had been shot. This was why someone had tried to execute a Special Forces combat dog in the middle of nowhere. Whatever was on this card, someone was willing to kill to keep it secret. He had a laptop. a ruggedized Panasonic Toughbook he'd kept from his military days. It had no internet connection, no way to communicate with the outside world. But it could read an SD card. Marcus booted up the laptop and slid the card into the reader. A single folder appeared labeled Evidence. Inside were video files, document scans, audio recordings. Marcus opened the first video file, and his blood turned cold. The footage was grainy shot from a security camera in what looked like a military kennel facility. Timestamp October 3rd. 2 men in civilian clothes were inspecting a line of German shepherds. One of the men was holding a clipboard. The other was pointing at specific dogs and shaking his head. The audio was clear enough to hear their conversation. These 3 failed the aggression test, the first man said. They won't make it through combat cert. Doesn't matter, the second man replied. We certify them anyway. The contract is for 40 dogs. We deliver 40 dogs. What happens to them downrange isn't our problem. But they'll get soldiers killed. They'll get us paid. That's what matters. Now sign the forms. Marcus watched in growing horror as the man signed certification documents for dogs that had failed their combat training. Dogs that would be sent into war zones unprepared. Dogs that would get handlers killed. He opened the next file. It was a spreadsheet. Columns of numbers, names, dollar amounts. It took Marcus 30 seconds to understand what he was looking at. It was a fraud scheme. Someone was billing the military for combat dog training, taking shortcuts with animals that weren't qualified, and pocketing the difference. Millions of dollars. Over the course of 3 years. But it got worse. The next video file showed a warehouse. A man in an expensive suit was talking to someone off camera. Marcus recognized the warehouse. It was at Fort Bragg. He'd walked past it 100 times. The auditor is asking questions, the man in the suit said, about the certification records, about the dogs that died in theater. Then handle it, a voice off camera replied. A voice Marcus recognized. His hands started shaking. How exactly do you want me to handle a federal auditor? The same way we handled the last person who asked too many questions. Permanently. The camera shifted, and Marcus saw the second man's face. Colonel Richard Vance, Deputy Commander of Special Operations Acquisition. One of the most decorated officers in Special Operations. A man Marcus had met personally. A man who'd shaken his hand and told him he was making the army proud. And a man who was apparently ordering the murder of federal auditors. The next file was the worst. It was dashcam footage from what looked like a military vehicle. Night vision. A dirt road in the middle of nowhere. 2 figures walking ahead. One was a man in civilian clothes carrying a briefcase. The other was a German shepherd on a leash. Axel. The vehicle stopped. Someone got out. The man with the briefcase turned. Colonel Vance sent you? Thank God, I thought... The gunshot cut him off. The man dropped. The German shepherd lunged, snarling, trying to protect his handler. A second gunshot. The dog yelped and fell. The camera moved as someone approached, checked the man's pulse, then aimed at the dog's head for the kill shot. But before the trigger was pulled, headlights appeared on the road. A civilian vehicle approaching. The shooter cursed, grabbed the briefcase and ran. The dashcam went dark. Marcus sat in silence, staring at the screen. Axel had witnessed a murder. The murder of a federal auditor who'd been investigating the training fraud. And then Axel had been shot and left for dead. But he'd survived. He'd crawled away from the kill site, and somehow over days or weeks he'd made his way north. Running, hiding, carrying the evidence that would bring down everyone involved. The dog was a witness. The last witness. And that's why men were still hunting him. Marcus looked at Axel, who was watching him with those steady, intelligent eyes. They tried to kill you because you saw too much, Marcus said quietly. And they'll try again if they find out you're alive. As if in answer, the sound of Engines echoed across the frozen landscape. Distant, but growing closer. Snowmobiles. Multiple machines. Coming fast. Marcus moved to the window and peered through a gap in the curtain. 3 black snowmobiles were cutting across the open tundra toward his cabin. The riders were dressed in tactical gear, and they were carrying weapons. They'd found him. They'd found Axel, and they were coming to finish the job. Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in 8 months. Purpose. Clarity. The fog of grief and guilt that had paralyzed him lifted. He grabbed his rifle, checked his ammunition, looked at Axel, who was on his feet now, despite his injuries, hackles raised, growling low at the approaching threat. "Easy, boy," Marcus said. "We're not running. Not this time." The snowmobile stopped 100 yards from the cabin. The riders dismounted. One of them raised a bullhorn. "Marcus Chen, we know you're in there. We're here for the dog. Send him out and we'll leave you alone." Marcus didn't answer. He simply chambered around and waited. "We don't want trouble," the voice continued. "The animal is military property. Stolen military property. You're harboring a federal asset. Just open the door and let us take him." Axel pressed against Marcus's leg. The dog knew these men, knew what they'd do to him. His entire body was trembling, but not with fear, with rage. Marcus made his decision. He opened the door and stepped onto the porch, his rifle held across his chest. The 3 men tensed. One raised a weapon, but the leader held up a hand. "That's smart," the leader said. He was tall with a shaved head and the build of an operator. Former military for sure, probably contractor now. "Just bring out the dog and this is over." "Who are you?" Marcus called back. "Private security, working for the army." "Bullshit," Marcus said. "The army doesn't hire contractors to track down lost canines in Alaska, and they don't shoot them and leave them to freeze, so I'll ask again. Who are you?" The leader's expression hardened. "You don't want to make this difficult. I don't want to make this anything," Marcus replied. "You're trespassing. Leave." "We can't do that. Then we have a problem." The standoff stretched. The 3 men were professionals. Marcus could see it in how they positioned themselves in overlapping fields of fire, how they kept their weapons ready but not quite aimed. They were waiting for him to make a mistake, to give them legal justification to open fire. But Marcus hadn't survived 16 denied area missions by making mistakes. "This is your last chance," the leader said. "Give us the dog or we come in and take him." Marcus saw the leader's hand move toward a radio. He was calling for backup, more men, more firepower. The tactical situation was about to get very bad. And then Axel made the decision for both of them. The dog slipped past Marcus and out the door, but he didn't run toward the men. He ran to the side of the cabin towards the tree line, drawing their attention, drawing their fire away from Marcus. "There!" one of the contractors yelled. 2 of them took off after the dog, leaving the leader alone. Big mistake. Marcus moved. He covered the 15 yards between the porch and the leader in under 3 seconds. The man tried to bring his weapon up, but Marcus was already inside his guard. A strike to the throat, a sweep of the legs. The contractor went down hard, Marcus's knee on his chest, his rifle pressed to the man's face. "Who sent you?" Marcus demanded. The man couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Marcus eased the pressure just enough. "Vance," the man gasped. "Colonel Vance sent us to clean up loose ends." "The dog?" "And you. He knows you have the evidence, knows you'll use it." Gunshots cracked in the distance. Marcus's blood went cold. Axel. He struck the contractor hard enough to knock him unconscious, zip-tied his hands, and ran toward the sound. Marcus crashed through the snow, his boots sinking knee-deep with every stride, his breath coming in frozen gasps that burned his lungs. The gunshots had stopped, and that silence was worse than the noise. He'd left the contractor zip-tied and unconscious by the cabin, But the other two were out there somewhere hunting Axel through the trees, and Marcus knew with absolute certainty that if he didn't reach them first, the dog was dead. He found the first blood trail 200 yards into the forest. But it wasn't Axel's blood. It was human, fresh and bright red against the pristine white snow. Marcus followed it with his rifle up, scanning the tree line. The trail led to a contractor slumped against a birch tree, clutching his leg. Deep puncture wounds marked his thigh through the torn tactical pants. Axel had gotten him. The man looked up at Marcus, terror flooding his eyes. "Don't shoot." He gasped. "Please, that thing nearly tore my leg off." Marcus kicked the man's weapon away. "Where's your partner?" "I don't know. We split up to flank the dog. Then it just appeared out of nowhere like a ghost. It didn't bark, didn't make a sound, just hit me and vanished." Military working dogs were trained for this. Ambush tactics, strike from concealment, disable the target and disappear before reinforcements arrived. Axel was wounded and alone, but he was still operating like the combat animal he'd been trained to be. He was still fighting. Marcus heard branches breaking to his left. He spun, bringing his rifle to bear, but it was Axel who emerged from the undergrowth. The dog was limping, his bandage torn, and blood-soaked, his muzzle stained dark. But his eyes were clear and focused. He'd taken down one armed man. Now he was ready for the next threat. "Good boy," Marcus breathed. "Where's the third one?" Axel's ears swiveled. He was tracking something Marcus couldn't hear. The dog moved back into the trees, and Marcus followed, trusting the animal's senses over his own. They found the third contractor 50 yards deeper into the forest. He was on his radio calling for backup. His weapon trained on the path Axel had taken. He never saw Marcus come up behind him. "Drop it," Marcus commanded. The man froze, then slowly lowered his weapon. "You don't understand what you're protecting," he said. "That dog is evidence in a federal investigation. You're obstructing justice." "Funny," Marcus replied, "because the evidence I saw showed your boss murdering a federal auditor. So I'm thinking you're not the good guys here." The contractor's expression shifted. He knew Marcus had seen the files, which meant Marcus was now on the same kill list as Axel. "Vance will send everyone," the man said quietly. "You can't win this." "Watch me." Marcus secured the third contractor and made his way back to the cabin with Axel at his side. He zip-tied all three men together in a supply shed 50 yards from the main structure. They'd survive the cold for a few hours, long enough for Marcus to figure out his next move. But as he stepped back into the cabin, he knew the next move was already decided for him. They couldn't stay here. Vance knew where he was. More contractors would come, better equipped, more ruthless. This cabin had been his sanctuary for 8 months, but now it was a trap. He had one chance. One person he trusted outside the military chain of command. Someone who'd made a career of exposing the kind of corruption that got soldiers killed. He pulled out a satellite phone he'd kept for emergencies and dialed a number he'd memorized but never called. It rang 4 times. Then a woman's voice answered, sharp and professional. "This is Martinez." "Sarah, it's Marcus Chen." There was a pause. "Marcus? Jesus Christ, you're supposed to be dead." "Only on paper. Listen, I don't have much time. I need to meet you in Fairbanks. I have evidence of a military procurement fraud that goes to the top. Millions of dollars, dead auditors, and a Special Forces K-9 that witnessed a murder." Sarah Martinez had been an investigative journalist for the Anchorage Tribune before she'd gone freelance exposing corruption in military contracts. She was former Marine Corps herself, an intelligence analyst who'd turned her skills to journalism after her brother had died from faulty body armor that had been certified safe by a contractor who'd cut corners for profit. She didn't trust the system because the system had killed people she loved. That made her Marcus's only ally. "How dirty are we talking?" she asked. "Colonel Richard Vance, Deputy Commander of Special Operations Acquisition. He's been certifying untrained combat dogs, pocketing the training funds, and killing anyone who asks questions. Sarah's breath hissed through the phone. Vance. Marcus, do you understand what you're saying? That man has friends in Congress. He's being groomed for general. If you're wrong about this, I have video. Marcus interrupted. Of him ordering a hit, of contractors falsifying training records, of dogs being sent into combat zones unprepared. It's all on a micro SD card that a German shepherd carried through 3,000 miles of wilderness to stay alive. Another pause. Then Sarah's voice came back harder. Where are you? Coldfoot. But I can't stay here. They've already sent contractors. We need to move. Okay. There's a safe house in Fairbanks that veterans use, off the grid. I'll text you the address. Can you make it there? Marcus looked at Axel, who was lying by the fire watching him with those steady eyes. We'll make it. Marcus, Sarah said quietly, if what you're saying is true, if Vance really is this dirty, then coming forward makes you the biggest threat to a very powerful man. He won't stop with contractors. He'll use every resource he has. I know. Then why are you doing this? You got out. You disappeared. You could stay dead. Marcus looked at the 3 bronze stars he'd left on the table when he'd fled his old life. Thought about Rodriguez and Mac and Thorns who'd never gotten the chance to disappear. Because staying dead means 3 good men died for nothing, and because someone needs to stand up for the ones who can't stand up for themselves. He ended the call and began packing. He didn't have much. A go bag he'd kept ready out of habit. His weapons, ammunition, the laptop with the evidence files. He wrapped the micro SD card in waterproof material and secured it in a hidden pocket. Then he turned to Axel. We're going on a trip, boy. 120 miles through country that wants us dead in weather that's trying to kill us. And we're being hunted by professionals who have every advantage. You up for it? Axel stood, limped over to Marcus, placed his head against Marcus's leg. The answer was clear. They left Coldfoot at 2 p.m., moving on snowshoes Marcus had modified to handle his weight and pack. Axel stayed close, his injured leg stiff but functional, his nose constantly working to sample the air. Marcus had plotted a route that avoided roads and known trails following ridgelines and frozen rivers where tracks would be harder to spot. It would take 3 days minimum in conditions that hovered around -50. Most people would call it suicide. Marcus called it a fighting chance. The first day was pure survival. The cold was a living thing that tried to steal the heat from their bodies with every gust of wind. Marcus had wrapped Axel in a modified tactical vest lined with thermal material, but the dog still shivered. They made 30 miles before Marcus called a halt and used his entrenching tool to dig a snow cave on the lee side of a ridge. Inside the insulated pocket, the temperature rose to a survivable -10. Marcus boiled snow for water, mixed in electrolyte powder, and gave half to Axel. They ate calorie-dense rations in silence. Outside, the wind screamed. I had a dog once, Marcus said into the darkness. When I was a kid. German shepherd like you. His name was Bear. He died while I was at basic training. My mom wrote me a letter. Said he'd waited by the door every day looking for me. When I came home on leave, there was just this empty space where he used to be. Axel's ears twitched. He moved closer, pressing his warm body against Marcus's side. I thought about him a lot. Downrange. Wondering if that kind of loyalty was even real, or if I'd imagined it through a kid's eyes. Marcus scratched behind Axel's ears. But you're real. You ran 3,000 miles to stay alive. You protected that evidence even when they shot you and left you to freeze. That's not training. That's something deeper. The dog looked up at him. In the dim glow of Marcus's headlamp, Axel's eyes held an understanding that transcended species. They were both soldiers, both survivors, both carrying wounds that went deeper than flesh. They slept in shifts. Marcus woke every hour to check for frostbite and keep the entrance to the snow cave from getting blocked. Axel never fully slept, his ears always alert, tracking sounds Marcus couldn't hear. They were a team now. Neither one could survive this without the other. Day 2 brought new dangers. Marcus spotted a drone at 11 a.m., a small quadcopter sweeping the landscape in a grid pattern. They were being tracked. Vance had resources, and he was using them. Marcus and Axel took cover in a copse of stunted spruce and waited for the drone to pass. It made 3 passes, then flew north. They'd been searching the wrong area. For now. But Marcus knew it was only a matter of time. The contractors would analyze likely routes, factor in weather and terrain. They'd set up checkpoints at key choke points. The net was closing. That afternoon, Axel proved his worth. They were crossing a frozen river when the dog suddenly stopped. His hackles raised. He stared at a snowdrift 30 yards ahead and growled. Marcus trusted the warning. He unsung his rifle and approached carefully. Hidden in the drift was a snowmobile. Fresh tracks led away toward the south. Someone was ahead of them, waiting. Marcus changed course, taking a longer route, through rougher terrain. It cost them time and energy, but it kept them alive. By nightfall, they'd covered another 35 miles. They were more than halfway to Fairbanks, but Marcus could feel exhaustion setting in. His fingers were numb despite his gloves. His face was raw from windburn, and Axel's limp was getting worse. They made another snow cave. Marcus unwrapped Axel's wound and felt his heart sink. The stitches had torn. The wound was bleeding again. He used the last of his medical supplies to repack and bandage it, but he knew the dog needed real treatment. A vet, antibiotics, rest, none of which they could afford right now. "I'm sorry, boy," Marcus whispered as he worked. "I know it hurts, but we're so close. One more day. Can you give me one more day?" Axel licked his hand. The answer was yes. Day 3 started badly. Marcus woke to the sound of helicopter rotors. A big bird, probably a Black Hawk. It was searching the area they'd just left sweeping with thermal imaging. Marcus buried their heat signature under snow and debris and prayed the insulation would hold. The helicopter made 2 passes, then moved on. They'd missed them by maybe 500 yards, but the helicopter meant Vance was desperate. He was throwing everything at this, which meant Marcus and Axel were close to safety, close enough to be a real threat. They pushed hard, covering the final 40 miles in 8 brutal hours. By the time the lights of Fairbanks appeared on the horizon, Marcus was operating on pure will and Axel was barely keeping his feet. But they'd made it. The safe house was in a run-down neighborhood on the edge of town, a small 1-story house with peeling paint and a yard full of snow-covered junk. It looked abandoned. Perfect. Marcus approached carefully, his hand on his weapon. He knocked 3 times, paused, then knocked twice more. The code Sarah had given him. The door opened. Sarah Martinez stood there, and Marcus barely recognized her. She'd aged since the last time he'd seen her. Her dark hair had streaks of grey. Her face was leaner, harder, but her eyes were the same. Sharp, uncompromising, searching for truth. "Marcus," she breathed. Then she saw Axel. "And you must be the witness." They stumbled inside. Sarah had medical supplies ready. She was a veteran herself, and she knew how to treat combat injuries. She went to work on Axel while Marcus collapsed onto a couch, his body finally giving in to 3 days of hypothermic stress. "They're looking for you," Sarah said as she cleaned Axel's wound. "There are contractors all over the city, showing your photo, claiming you're AWOL and dangerous." "I have the evidence," Marcus said. He pulled out the laptop and the micro SD card. "Everything Vance has done. It's all here." Sarah's hands stilled. "Marcus, once we look at this, once we confirm what you're saying, there's no going back. We'll have to move fast. Upload it to multiple news outlets. Federal investigators. Make it too public for Vance to bury. But that also means painting a target on our backs." "The target's already there," Marcus replied. I'm just choosing to shoot back." They were transferring the files to Sarah's encrypted server when the first window exploded inward. Glass sprayed across the room. Axel barked a warning. Marcus dove for his rifle. Sarah killed the lights. "Back door," she hissed. "Now." But when Marcus reached the kitchen, he saw flashlights in the backyard. They were surrounded. Vance's contractors had found them, and this time they weren't taking chances. This was a kill team. Marcus heard the front door splinter. Boots in the hallway. He had maybe 10 seconds. He looked at Sarah, who was clutching the laptop with the evidence, looked at Axel, who stood ready to fight despite his injuries, and made a decision. "The files," he said urgently. "Do you have an upload backup? Something that triggers automatically?" Sarah's eyes widened. "I have a dead man's switch. If I don't check in every 6 hours, the files upload to every contact I have. FBI, DOJ, CNN, Washington Post, everyone. Activate it. But if they kill us, that's the point. Vance thinks he can clean this up quietly. We make it so killing us triggers exactly what he's trying to prevent." Marcus chambered around. "Activate it now." Sarah's fingers flew across her phone. "Done. We have 6 hours." The first contractor appeared in the doorway. Axel hit him low, going for the legs. The man went down screaming. Marcus used the distraction to move to cover. More men poured in. This wasn't a small team. Vance had sent everyone. And in that moment, as bullets started flying, and Axel fought beside him with the courage of a soldier who'd already died once and refused to die again, Marcus realized something. They weren't going to shoot their way out of this. They were going to have to do something smarter. They were going to have to make Vance come to them. The safe house was a kill box, and Marcus knew it. 5 contractors were stacking up in the hallway, another 3 were breaching through the back, and God only knew how many more were outside, establishing a perimeter. In 30 seconds, this room would be filled with professional killers, and the evidence that could bring down Colonel Richard Vance would die with them in a hail of bullets that the local police would write off as a justified takedown of a dangerous AWOL soldier. But Marcus hadn't survived 16 denied area missions by accepting the tactical situation he was given. He changed the game. "Sarah," he shouted over the chaos. "Is there a basement?" "Crawl space. Access through the bathroom. Go, take Axel. I'll buy you time. Marcus, they'll kill you. Not if they think I'm already dead." He grabbed 2 smoke grenades from his go-bag legacy of his Delta days that he never traveled without and pulled the pins. Thick, choking smoke billowed out, filling the small house in seconds. The contractors immediately backed off. Smoke meant they couldn't identify targets, couldn't confirm kills. They'd have to wait it out or risk shooting each other in the confusion. Marcus used those precious seconds to move. He grabbed his rifle, shattered the bathroom window with the stock, and fired 3 rounds into the night sky. Then he dropped the rifle on the bathroom floor, grabbed Sarah's laptop, shoved it into his pack, and dove through the narrow crawl space access behind the toilet. Sarah and Axel were already below, in a dirt-floored space, barely 4 feet high, that smelled of mold and frozen earth. Marcus pulled the access panel closed above him just as he heard boots entering the bathroom. A flashlight beam swept the room, paused on the shattered window and the abandoned rifle. "He went out the window," a voice called. "Heading east on foot. 2 of you follow. Rest of you sweep the house. Confirm the woman and the dog are neutralized." Marcus held his breath. Neutralized. That was contractor speak for killed. They weren't taking prisoners. This was an erasure operation. Sarah's face in the dim light from her phone was pale but composed. She was a Marine veteran. She'd been in tight spots before. Axel pressed against Marcus's side, absolutely silent. The dog understood stealth better than most soldiers. They heard the contractors systematically clearing the house above them. Doors slamming open, furniture being overturned. One man's voice rose above the others. "Kitchen's clear. Bedroom's clear. No bodies. Where the hell are they? They can't have gone far. The woman was uploading files when we breached. Her computer's not here. Chen must have taken it. Then find him. Vance wants this done tonight. The boots moved away, moved outside. After 10 minutes of silence, Marcus finally allowed himself to breathe. But they weren't safe. Not even close. They think I ran, Marcus whispered, which gives us maybe an hour before they realize I'm still in the area and expand the search grid. We need to move. Move where? Sarah hissed back. They have the whole neighborhood locked down. Marcus pulled out his phone and brought up a map of Fairbanks he'd studied during their journey south. His mind worked through tactical options. They were outnumbered, outgunned, being hunted by professionals in a city those professionals now controlled. Every advantage belonged to the enemy, except one. Sarah, how many people did your dead man's switch send the evidence to? 47 contacts, journalists, federal agents, congressional staffers, human rights organizations. And it triggers in how long? 5 hours and 12 minutes. Marcus's mind raced. Vance's entire strategy depended on containing this, keeping it quiet, making 3 people disappear before the evidence went public. But what if they flipped that script? What if instead of running, they forced Vance to come out of the shadows? We need to get to the FBI field office, Marcus said. Downtown. It's a federal building. Secure. Vance can't send contractors into a federal facility without exposing himself. Marcus, that's 8 miles from here, through a city full of people hunting us. We'll never make it. We will if we make enough noise that Vance has no choice but to respond personally. Sarah stared at him. You want to draw him out. He's the linchpin. The contractors are hired muscle. They disappear the moment their employer goes down. We take down Vance, the whole thing collapses. Marcus looked at Axel. And we have the one witness who can identify him at the murder scene. A witness Vance doesn't know is still alive. They crawled through the narrow space to an exterior vent that opened into the backyard. Marcus went first, scanning the area with his pistol drawn. 2 contractors were standing by a black SUV 30 yards away, smoking cigarettes and watching the street. Their body language was relaxed. They thought the targets were running, thought this was cleanup. Marcus signaled to Sarah and Axel. They slipped out of the crawl space and moved in, the opposite direction staying low, using parked cars and shadows for cover. The neighborhood was working class. Old houses, chain-link fences, dogs barking in yards. Normal people living normal lives, having no idea that a shadow war was being fought on their streets. They made it 3 blocks before Axel's ears swiveled. The dog stopped, stared at an alley to their left. Marcus trusted that warning. He pulled Sarah behind a dumpster just as 2 contractors emerged from the alley, sweeping the street with thermal optics. Contact, one of them said into his radio. Heat signature. 2 humans, 1 animal. Northeast corner of Cowles and 30th. The game had changed. They'd been spotted. Marcus made a snap decision. Sarah, can you still upload those files manually, without waiting for the dead man's switch? Yes, but it'll take 10 minutes to push everything to the servers. I need time and a connection. Then we split up. You take Axel and find somewhere with Wi-Fi. A coffee shop. A library. Anywhere public with witnesses. Upload everything. I'll draw them away. Marcus, they'll kill you. Not if I kill them first. He pressed his pistol into her hand. Axel will protect you. Trust him. He's gotten this far for a reason. Sarah looked at the dog, then at Marcus. She understood what he was really saying. If Marcus didn't make it, Axel and the evidence had to. The mission was bigger than any one of them. Don't die, she said fiercely. We've already lost too many good ones. Marcus gave her a tight smile. Not planning on it. He stood up and stepped into the street, making himself visible. The contractor's thermals lit up. Target acquired. One of them barked into his radio, moving to intercept. Marcus ran, not away but toward the city center, toward lights and people and traffic. The contractors followed. He could hear their boots pounding the pavement behind him, could hear more engines starting, more voices on radios. He'd kicked the hornet's nest. Now he had to go survive long enough for Sarah to finish the mission. He cut through an alley, vaulted a fence, emerged onto a main street. A 24-hour diner sat on the corner, warm light spilling from its windows. Late-night customers visible through the glass. Marcus burst through the door. "Call 911!" he shouted at the startled waitress. "Armed men are chasing me. I'm a military veteran and I have evidence of a crime." The diner erupted in chaos. Customers dove for cover. Someone screamed. But 3 people pulled out phones, started dialing, started filming. The contractors appeared at the door, but they couldn't come in. Not with witnesses, not with cameras. They'd operated in the shadows, and Marcus had just dragged them into the light. One of them spoke urgently into his radio. "Target is in a public location. Multiple civilians, multiple phones. Orders." Marcus couldn't hear the response, but he could guess. Vance was losing control of the situation. The quiet erasure he'd planned was turning into a public incident. And every second that passed was another second closer to Sarah uploading the files. Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Files uploading. 7 minutes. Where are you?" He typed back. "Making friends. Stay safe." The standoff at the diner lasted 4 minutes. Then Marcus saw something that made his blood freeze. A black sedan pulled up. The door opened, and Colonel Richard Vance himself stepped out. He was in civilian clothes, expensive suit, leather shoes. But Marcus recognized him instantly. The man from the video, the man who'd ordered a federal auditor executed. He looked calm, composed. A decorated officer dealing with an unfortunate situation. Vance walked into the diner. The contractors parted for him. He smiled at the terrified customers. "I apologize for the disturbance," he said smoothly. "I'm Colonel Richard Vance, United States Army Special Operations Command. The man at the counter is a soldier suffering from severe PTSD. He's armed and he's made threats against federal personnel. We're here to get him the help he needs." It was a masterful performance. The civilians' fear shifted. They looked at Marcus differently now. Not as a victim, but as a threat. A dangerous veteran who'd snapped. Marcus stood slowly. "He's lying. I have evidence that Colonel Vance has been defrauding the military and murdering witnesses. It's all on video, and in about 5 minutes it's going to be in the hands of the FBI." Vance's smile never wavered. "You see? Paranoid delusions. Classic PTSD presentation." He took a step closer. "Marcus, I know what you've been through. I know about Kabul, about the men you lost, but this isn't the way. Let me help you." "You can't help me," Marcus said quietly, "because you're the one who killed them." The smile finally cracked. "What are you talking about?" "The intelligence that sent my team into that ambush in Kabul. It came through your office, through Special Operations Acquisition. You fed us bad intel because my team was getting too close to your fraud scheme. We were asking questions about combat dog certifications, about contractors cutting corners. So you got us killed." Vance's face went cold. The mask dropped. "You can't prove any of that." "I don't have to. The German shepherd you tried to execute, the one who witnessed you ordering a federal auditor's murder, he's alive, and in about 4 minutes his handler is going to upload video of your face to every federal agency in the country." For the first time, Vance looked genuinely rattled. "That dog died." "You thought he died, but he crawled 3,000 miles to stay alive, because that's what good soldiers do. They complete the mission no matter what." Vance's hand moved toward his jacket. Marcus saw it, saw the telltale bulge of a concealed weapon. The civilians saw it too. More phones came out. More cameras. "I wouldn't," Marcus said calmly. "Not with 20 cameras on you. Not with 911 already called. You kill me, here you become. The story. And the evidence uploads anyway. Vance's hand froze. His mind was racing. Marcus could see it. Calculating odds, weighing options, coming to the same conclusion Marcus had already reached. He'd lost. The moment Marcus had made this public, the game was over. But desperate men do desperate things. Secure him. Vance ordered his contractors. Use necessary force. The contractors hesitated. They were professionals. They understood that necessary force, in front of civilians with cameras, meant their faces would be on every news channel in America by morning. That hesitation saved Marcus's life. The diner door burst open. Not contractors this time. FBI agents, 8 of them in raid jackets with weapons drawn. And behind them, walking with a pronounced limp, but with his head held high, was Axel. And holding his leash with a fierce, protective grip was Sarah Martinez. FBI, the lead agent shouted. Everyone on the ground now. Vance's face went white. I'm a colonel in the United States Army. These are my men conducting a lawful operation. You're Colonel Richard Vance, and you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and murder. The agent held up a tablet. We received a data dump 6 minutes ago. Video, audio, documents, all of it authenticated and corroborated by a federal witness. He nodded toward Axel. Military working dog, officially listed as KIA but very much alive and very much able to identify you. Vance looked at the dog. Axel stared back. The dog's hackles were raised. A low growl rumbled in his chest. He remembered. He remembered everything. That's not admissible, Vance said desperately. A dog can't testify. But I can, Sarah said, stepping forward. I'm Sarah Martinez, former Marine Corps intelligence analyst, investigative journalist, and as of 30 minutes ago, federal witness under protective custody. The dog led us to the evidence. But I've authenticated every file, every video, every document, and I've provided testimony about your contractor's attempted murder of myself, Marcus Chen, and this animal. The FBI agents moved in. Vance struggled as they pulled his arms behind his back. You don't understand what you've done, he hissed at Marcus. The people I work for, the money behind this, you've just signed your own death warrant. Maybe, Marcus said quietly. But I've also signed yours. They took Vance away, took his contractors too. The diner slowly emptied as witnesses were interviewed and statements were taken. Marcus sat at the counter, exhausted beyond measure. Sarah slid onto the stool next to him. Axel lay at their feet, his duty finally done. It's over, Sarah said softly. The files are everywhere. CNN is already running the story. The Pentagon has opened an investigation. You did it, Marcus. You brought down one of the most corrupt officers in special operations. Marcus looked at Axel. The dog's eyes were closing. He was finally allowing himself to rest, to trust that the fight was finished. We did it, Marcus corrected. All 3 of us. A dead soldier, a crusading journalist, and a dog who refused to quit. Sarah smiled, reached down and scratched behind Axel's ears. What happens now? Marcus thought about his cabin in Coldfoot, about 8 months of isolation and grief, about 3 dead teammates whose names he'd carry forever. Now, he said, now we make sure they didn't die for nothing. We testify. We make this stick, and we find every other corrupt bastard who thinks soldiers are disposable. That's going to take a while. Good. I wasn't doing anything important anyway. They sat in silence for a while. Outside, the Alaskan dawn was beginning to break, cold and clear and beautiful. Marcus felt something he hadn't felt since Kabul. Purpose, a reason to keep fighting. Axel's tail thumped once against the floor. The dog looked up at him. And in that moment, Marcus understood. They'd saved each other. A soldier who'd lost his faith, and a dog who'd lost everything but his mission. They'd found each other in the frozen hell of Alaska, and together they'd brought down an empire of corruption. "Come on, boy," Marcus said, standing. "Let's go home." But he didn't mean Coldfoot. He didn't mean the cabin where he'd gone to die slowly in the cold. He meant something new, something he'd build with Sarah and Axel and all the other broken soldiers who needed a reason to believe the fight still mattered. He meant hope.